What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a few things that we're going to be discussing with you today, talking about more conditions of potential tropical development in the Atlantic, when that will start ramping up, and a few other things as well. So let's go ahead and dive right into it right here. We're going to go ahead and start with the National Hurricane Center because we do have this area of interest tagged that we're going to be paying attention to over the next couple of days. So we're going to be watching this. The probabilities of this has really doubled over the last 24 hours. We went from 20% to 40% in the next 7 days. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at this. An area of low pressure is forecast to develop, just refreshed. An area of forecast is forecast to develop early next week off the coast of Central America. Environmental conditions appear conducive for some gradual development after this time, and a tropical depression could form as the system moves west-northwestward off the coast of Central America and southern Mexico. Formation chance through the next 48 hours is 0%. Formation chance in the next 7 days is 40%. So this is a more long-term threat that we're paying attention to right here, and we're going to be keeping a very close eye on that going forward. But the situation that we have right here, this is going to be a tropical wave that comes through the Caribbean and moves through Central America and then enters the Eastern Pacific and develops over there. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to going forward. But for the rest of this video, we're going to be kind of talking about some of the conditions and talking about when we could finally see our first tropical development. And we're going to go ahead and get started by talking about maybe looking at some of the European forecasting charts and then going from there. So here's the European forecasting charts that we have pulled up for you right here. This is the latest model run as of yesterday. At the time of recording this video, we don't have today's out just yet, so please do bear with me. I do apologize. And what I do have posted right here is the week of from the 23rd to the 30th of June. This is the tropical cyclone development probabilities that we have right here based on what we have with the European. So here's the possibility of a tropical cyclone passing within a 300-kilometer radius pretty much also registers the probability of tropical cyclone development as well. So this is the week of the 23rd to the 30th. As you're noticing right here, you're noticing a relatively widespread chance across parts of the MDR and in parts of the Caribbean as well. It's not a particularly big chance, I would say. Like, we're looking at 20 to 30% at its max, but that has been increasing over the last few days, and we're going to want to pay attention. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and go back to the 16th of June to show you what we had before. Before, we weren't really seeing that many odds of development. We were seeing the highest probabilities at 30 to 40% near the Central American coast around Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Panama right here. And then as we went to the 17th, we started noticing those odds increasing in both the MDR and in the Caribbean as well. And you're really noticing all of these probabilities start to turn up pretty quickly over the last couple of days. We went from like a 10 to 20% probability in a concentrated area to a 10%, 20% probability in a more wide region, as well as a 20 to 30% in a more broad region as well. So that's what we have for the 23rd to the 30th. And then from June 30th to July 7th, you're noticing those probabilities are still there. They're a little bit less than they are for this upcoming week, but they're still there. It's mainly concentrated in the central and western main development region, interestingly, and then also again off the coast of Central America. But you are noticing probabilities of development potentially off the coast of the Carolinas and Virginia over here. So what that's telling me is that they're registering maybe a possibility of a low pressure system detaching from the fronts and then becoming a subtropical or tropical system over there. So that's kind of also something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. And then moving on to July 7th to July 14th, taking a quick look at that. Probabilities decrease across much of the regions listed above, but that you can also attribute that to just kind of how far out we're looking at this point. we're looking at least 2 weeks out at this current point in terms of its probabilities. Right here, we're still looking at this mainly just to kind of see, okay, what are the early indications at this current point, and when could this develop? But this is from July 7th to July 14th, right here, and then moving on to the 14th to the 21st. Taking a look at that, it's kind of more scattered right now, but we'll have to pay attention to it. Matter of fact, from yesterday, there's still some probabilities of this kind of fluctuating up and down generally, but that's kind of what you're going to see, at least for the next few weeks, for stuff this far out. I wouldn't take this at face value or anything like that. Things are very subject to change, especially this far out, but I do kind of look at these as kind of indications of, okay, what could we potentially be seeing, and what are the odds going to look like? Because I also want to also pay attention to the Climate Prediction Center. They're not really having that much development happening in the Atlantic at all for the next couple of weeks as well. So I'm just curious, okay, what are these models seeing that other agencies aren't just yet? So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at in today's video going forward. So we're going to go ahead and start with conditions, and we're obviously going to start with the global sea surface temperatures as well. So what we're noticing with this right here is we're noticing the subtropical Atlantic, or at least the northern portion of the tropical Atlantic, has really turned up in the amount of warm water that's kind of over there. You're seeing a huge explosion of water temperatures in that part of the Atlantic, in the Atlantic basin right there. That's a pretty interesting blow up that I've noticed over the last little while there. I'm going to check the SST charts as well, just to kind of see where we were at previously. Looking at that SST maps for the North Atlantic, and then looking at where we have trends for this SST trends for the MDR and all of that. But that's kind of what we're looking at right here. You're noticing a really big explosion of sea surface temperature increases across this region right here in the Atlantic basin. You're noticing the Gulf temperature does decrease a little bit as well, but that's likely going to be temporary. In fact, we have the chart pulled up for you right here just to show you what we're looking at. And as you can see, still very warm, but it looks like the warming trend has stagnated a little bit and decreased slightly. I don't personally expect that to persist for too long. It's going to fluctuate. It's going to go up, maybe go down, maybe slow down a little bit. But the general trend is going to continue to go up through much of July and much of August, especially this week, as I know there's going to be a pretty significant heat wave that's going to be going on across much of the eastern United States. And I know that high pressure dome that's currently over the eastern U.S. is really going to affect also the Gulf region as well, because it's going to bring more warmer temperatures there as well. So that's something that you're going to want to pay attention to as well. So that's kind of what we're looking at in terms of our water temperature, at least in general. Looking at the water temperature anomalies right now, things are a little interesting. You're noticing kind of a bit more dispersed of anomalies. You're noticing a really big surge in SST anomalies across much of the northern tropical and subtropical Atlantic as well. But you're also noticing a more noisy main development region, particularly in the eastern half. You're noticing cooler SST anomalies along the coast of Africa right here, as well as more noisy areas in the southern main development region. But as you get into the western MDR, it becomes a bit more cooler than average. Same with much of the Caribbean, with the exception of the northwestern Caribbean and the Gulf. The Gulf is still very much warm, and you're still seeing very warm anomalies with that. But by and large, it looks like we're seeing more of a mixed signal than what we were seeing previously with the water temperature. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to going forward. Moving on to ocean heat content. Ocean heat content, or OHC for short, is essentially, as I've said before, how warm that water is and how deep down it ultimately goes. And what you're noticing from these analogs, taking a look at it from June 1st to June 20th, you're noticing the really large increase to the north of this OHC increase in the Atlantic basin right here, especially as you're seeing those very warm water temperatures starting to turn up. You're looking at, for example, you're looking at like 28 plus degrees Celsius waters across a large area right there. You have to understand that this just happened in the last few days to last week, and ultimately these waters need to take time for them to reach the surface. So that's kind of something very important I do want to brief, because you look at the water temperatures and you're going, oh my goodness, this is really starting to warm up and we're really going to potentially start seeing development soon. You have to understand that a lot of this is surface based and it hasn't really gone too far down deep across a lot of this that region right there. It's going to take time to do that. It has July to do it, it has August to do it, but it's eventually going to start seeing those returns increasing. But I do find it interesting just how far north we are at this time of the year. I actually want to go ahead and look at the analogs from last year to kind of see where we were at this particular moment. So let's go ahead and go to June 20th of last year. Definitely not as far to the north, but it was a lot more concentrated along the tropical part of the Atlantic basin. If you look at it now, it's a lot weaker OHC, but you're noticing it's spread out a lot further to the north, which is pretty interesting to say the very least. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. Another thing I do want to point out, though, is this OHC is more concentrated as well. It's much further to the west than it was last year at this point. Last year, it was kind of more spread out into much of the main development region and all of that, but because we've seen cooler water anomalies in that part of the world right there, it's more concentrated further to the north. Now, we're going to have to see how this will ultimately pan out, whether these OHC values increase further and further and further, which they likely will, or whether this will ultimately kind of be the situation where we don't have a lot of OHC, but it moves further up to the north. So that's a factor that you're going to want to pay attention to, in part because I do believe the further north that these anomalies in this OHC gets, the higher the probability that maybe puts up areas in like New England, the Atlantic coast, for example, New Jersey, New York, even in Canada, that would potentially put them more in the line of fire, because these tropical cyclones would have more time over that warm water and over deep water that's relatively deep as well, for it to kind of just be able to maintain its intensity closer to land before it starts to calm down, and as it approaches maybe Canada, maybe the New England, maybe the Mid-Atlantic region. So you're going to want to pay attention to those factors as well, and we'll continue to keep you updated on those. Taking a look at the wind shear now. Wind shear is going to be pretty interesting. Still not favorable for tropical development. This is a typical June pattern, but I have been paying attention to some model runs. This is the European right here, where you're starting to notice the wind shear starts to fracture quite a bit as you start to get into late June and early July. You're noticing now over the next few days, the wind shear is expected to kind of bend, and you're starting to notice more troughs and ridges over the next little while. It's still concentrated across much of the Caribbean, much of the main development region. You're not going to see much tropical development probabilities with that, but ultimately what you're looking at right here is you're starting to notice that wind shear starts to lift up further to the north, and then you're starting to notice an overall collapse in the wind shear, starting kind of simultaneously near the Gulf in the Caribbean and in the main development region around July 1st. You're noticing this wind shear really starting to get more wavy, getting more troughs and ridges, and weakens quite a bit as well. And this is what you typically see in July right here. This is a kind of more of an explosive start as we get towards Independence Day in the United States right here. And I say explosive in terms of just how much the wind shear just collapses across much of the tropics. So that's another factor you're going to want to pay attention to as well. Looking at that and continuing to look at those indicators, I also do want to look at the wind shear anomalies to just kind of look, okay, you're seeing all this collapse. What's the average right here? So you are seeing these average anomalies, above average anomalies right there, but you also want to keep a relatively close eye on parts of North Africa as well, around Morocco and parts of the main development region as well. You're going to want to pay attention to those areas. The reason I say North Africa, probability of Sahara dust. We'll get to that in a second. But what you're looking at right now is you're looking at potentially some stuff, or you're looking at above average shear at this current point in time, and then you're starting to notice a below average across parts of the eastern Atlantic and around average in parts of the MDR and eastern Caribbean as well. So those are some factors you're going to want to pay attention to as that wind shear pattern does start to fluctuate and start to change quite a bit more than it did previously. So that's what we have going on with the wind shear right now. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the moisture, because this is, in my opinion, the most important factor that we want to pay attention to. What we have right here is Sahara dust, the Sahara air layer. This is why tropical development is relatively difficult to develop across much of the main development region. It takes time for that to happen because this Sahara dust needs to calm down first. However, you're noticing around the 22nd, the Sahara dust starts to lift a bit further up to the north, and you're starting to notice more moisture entering the main development region as the monsoon season across the Sahel region starts to increase, and the intertropical convergence zone does start to see a new burst of moisture. Then you do start to see some Sahara dust moving into parts of the Caribbean, and then you're seeing another big Sahara air outbreak around early July. That's going to keep development at bay for a little bit, but we'll have to see what happens going forward. Now, let's go ahead and compare this to the precipitable water anomalies, and then you start to see a bit more of an interesting result right here. What we're noticing, at least in parts of the main development region and Africa over here, is you're noticing more moisture than average, especially as you continue to move, especially as the monsoon season starts to ramp up a bit more. Precipitable water is pretty much how much, how if you squeezed all the moisture in the atmosphere into rain and that falls. That's kind of the general gist of it. So it's kind of a moisture indicator right there. But by and large, what you're noticing with this is you're kind of noticing how how above average you're looking at, especially for parts of the main development region. Even in the subtropics in Africa, in the Atlantic right here, you're noticing that. Similar with parts of the Caribbean and in the Gulf, yes, there's a Sahara dust outbreak that's going to move across much of North America right there. Excuse me, but ultimately, by and large, you are noticing more moisture, at least over time, getting there, and you're noticing those averages continuing to increase, and then you're starting to see a pretty big moisture surge across much of the Atlantic right here. I want to check to see if this is something new or if this is something that's consistent. It looks like, at least for right now, it's relatively consistent according to the European, and we'll have to see how this will ultimately pan out and how this will ultimately allow for stuff to happen. So that's the kind of the situation we're dealing with in terms of conditions. Now, that's kind of the explanation as to why we're noticing those probabilities starting to increase across some of those regions. Now, if you take a look at it, at least in terms of the southwestern Caribbean, I'm noticing as well, I think part of it has to do with the tropical wave moving, starting to move, and potential has that shot of development, like just that chance just off the coast of Costa Rica or Nicaragua before moving through Central America and then developing over there. The NHC is generally leaning that this is going to be a tropical wave, move through there, and then develop in that part of the Eastern Pacific. So that's kind of something to pay attention to, and this is going to be a system that happens over the next few days or so. So I want to emphasize that. I was mainly focusing on the main development region and why kind of we're seeing this increase of potential for development. Do I think something's going to happen? It's extremely unlikely at this current point. I don't see, unless something surprising happens in the last few days of June, I don't see tropical development happening until July, because I'm noticing the wind shear patterns start to fluctuate quite a bit and start to collapse, as we mentioned in this video. Also noticing that big moisture surge around early July. I don't know if the models are going to hold on with that or if it's going to weaken or do anything like that. But if we do see a pretty big moisture surge like that far to the north, that's going to make the environment a lot more favorable in the main development region for tropical development. And that's a factor that you're going to want to pay attention to going forward. And that's something over the next few days we're definitely going to pay attention to here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. We are streaming again once again tomorrow night, starting at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and Atlantic Standard Time. So please be sure you tune in for that. We're going to have some guests come on as well. It's going to be pretty fun. It's kind of our weekly stream night with Saturday. I know we streamed on yesterday, but that was because of Hurricane Eric. But yeah, thanks for the continued support on the streams. We really do appreciate it here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel and at Storms United. But also, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We are 4 subscribers away from 12,000, so if you could hit that subscribe button, that would be much appreciated. And if you want to help out, hang out, or you want to ask us some questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.